Good afternoon, Scott Baker. How are you today?
I am well, Mikey Ames, and Monday, July 7th, we're back at it. And today's field note is about humor. The title is Have You Ever Met Someone Who is Very Funny and Not Smart? And it's a trick question because obviously there are smart people who are not funny.
Right.
But are there funny people who are not smart?
Nate Bargatze might be both funny and dumb, but he's got intelligence and not.
But he's also playing dumb.
Sort of. He's also playing authentic as well.
Well, to a degree, yeah. But there's a verbal dexterity there that's implicit. Now, the purpose of unpacking this field note for everyone is it's not so much that we would say that leaders, whether you're an athletic coach or a corporate leader or a major politician, need to be funny. If you're not funny, you might have some problems trying to be funny. The question is more the inverse, at least that's the focus of this field note, which is if you're looking to unpack intelligence in prospective candidates or the people you want to have on your team, or just the people you'd like to be around, are there some ways to elicit some sense of their gauge on humor that they might be protective about when they're first encountering you? Right? Is that that's how I read it?
Of their Yes, exactly. And that's how excuse me if you heard that on the audio here. I was looking to see if our stream was working in another spot.
Another spot, right?
Yeah. But I do believe that, when we're looking for, funny, it's a great indicator, right? And I don't know if it's because I just have a high opinion of my own ability to be funny that I really like the idea of like, oh yeah, definitely, right? Funny equals smart all the time. Or if it's, something that, because it's naturally attractive to me and other people as well, right? People who laugh at me are something that I'm very attracted to as well. I've often told other people that the whole reason that I became very interested in my wife back when we were dating was because of she thought I was funny, right?
Yeah, right.
That's the only hook I needed.
Now, and the one thing that we all want to know, and certainly in dating relationships is, and it's often the case with men and women, does she really think you're funny? Or is she just laughing and you feel so great that she's laughing?
Decades later, she's still doing that. So like if she was, it seems genuine. So if she were in here, she'd say, oh no, definitely Mike's funny.
Right. Because I actually think when I first met my wife, I happened to be talking to somebody that was in the room and had made a comment to me. And I said something back that was a bit of a joke. It was moderately funny. And then just had met the woman that was later my wife, and she laughed. Right. When you're like, oh, you get what I was doing here. It was a little bit subtle. So the question here in our terms, and this idea of whether you agree with what the field note says in terms of, is this a good way to actually conduct an interview? You could actually apply it to say, could you conduct a date this way? I don't think that will necessarily work. But there are some things to really think about, because there are studies that say that corporate leaders prefer people who do have a sense of humor, like by like 98%, something like that. Now, is that true? I mean, I think when you pose a question to a corporate leader, say, would you like a person with a sense of humor, or would you like somebody who is mercilessly serious all of the time? Most people are going to say, I like a sense of humor, right? You're just going to respond that way. But the Stanford Business School has a whole course in humor. I mean, these are things that we have to understand. Now, how you go about determining that and I think the one question is, we've talked about this in terms of aptitudes, but the one question would be, we all see this through our own lens, and we have a degree of where we are on the humor meter. And some people might see this and say, if we're trying to, I think I'm smart, so maybe I'm not funny enough. Can you get funnier? Well, that's not the point of the field note, but we can talk about that if you want to.
Well, I think the reason that is that line of thinking is important, Scott, is because the same questions would maybe come out of it is like, what are the sub skills that are involved with being funny?
Right, correct.
Yeah. And if you can identify what the sub skills are, then maybe you can like practice those things to get better. But you're also getting at the heart of what you're really after if you're a leader doing an interview, right? There's ways, And I think maybe a lot of the bullet points that are in the field note are based on the idea of let's focus on this one aspect of humor, this one sub skill underneath humor that allows you to be able to really tease out. Because what is it that we like about humor? And it might be different for different organizations or for different roles. The fact that somebody is able to creatively think in such a ways to make observations about this and this at the same time, bring those observations together and create something that is novel or new, with just your words, that if you're able to do that on an ongoing basis, it's just naturally the way that your brain works. Well, it stands to reason that you could do that in other areas as well. The sub skills that makes you witty, and maybe that's just what I described as wittiness, right? The ability to quickly improv those kinds of things on the fly. It definitely stands to reason that that kind of skill shows up in the marketing department or whatever, right? There's also a sub skill that comes to a person being funny is definitely someone who knows how to read a room, right? And it's not just about their ability to be appropriate, but their ability to kind of moderate what's going on in the room and see when it is that we need something, that maybe some ice needs to be broken, or maybe some tension needs to be broken, right? And so the fact that somebody can say something in such a way that breaks the ice in a way that makes everybody laugh,
it makes
really
it less
goes,
awkward.
but that really goes to like their ability to read emotion, read tension, read what's going on. And, people like that they're just as important in a locker room as they are in just a tense-filled meeting room, right?
Well, we actually talk about it. There is a leadership capability and how you actually make people feel protected in meetings where there's a degree of safety. And sometimes that's turning the stumble into a dance, as they say. And you can use humor to do that. And the thing that you were talking about, which is the cognitive ability to do the pattern matching, and that's kind of the field note is underlying it and saying, these are indicators. Humor is an indicator of a cognitive performance level and this emotional intelligence. You're looking at abstract reasoning, you're looking at creativity, you're looking at the social awareness. These are all very important things. Now, when you're in I'm just meeting you, I'm just setting, and particularly the field note is talking about talent assessment. I'm not sure that then, you can say to somebody, be funny, right? Are you funny? The answer won't really matter. So the field note is trying to pose some ways that you could raise questions. Now, are those awkward? I don't know that our field notes, let's see, after 4 years, 90,000 about subscribers and almost 1,500 posts, I don't know that most people in Substack would say, I love reading those field notes. They're so funny.
Right.
I don't think our reputation has pointed.
I think there might be one dad joke in all 1,500 that we've written, maybe one intentional dad joke, right? And even that, once you call it a dad joke, it's not really funny.
Yes, and our founding partner is the one who writes most of the field notes. I edit them. I'm not going to say that I've edited out jokes or tried to improve them. However, I would say that there's a certain tonality to them that's fairly consistent. And if there is any indication of humor, it's probably just a little bit sort of standard. Now, nobody's coming to field notes for that. I subscribe to 157 different Substack newsletters of all kinds of people out there. Many of them are incredibly funny, right? And so we're not going to make field notes funny, which is great. You're all like, thank goodness, right? Now, in this level of saying, well, how do I get you to do this? The field note is saying, well, can you pose questions that would cause people? And I think that the problem in this is that some of the questions in the field note are similar to questions that we hear of bizarro questions where they're like, how many nickels would you need to take to Mars if you were going to put a vending machine at the commissary? I mean, and you're like, what? And they're just trying to gauge your creativity in response. Maybe that gets you there. Maybe it doesn't. I think most people come into a job interview, where you're first meeting a candidate, particularly at a high level, where you're recruiting executives and whatnot. And they're probably approaching it a little bit like you would on a first date. And you certainly wouldn't go into a first date and be like, tell me all about yourself. I want to know about your family history and the house you grew up in and all of the baggage that you're going to carry into this relationship. People are not going to, respond well to that. And so you're going to be kind of natural. They're going to be kind of natural. I've always found, and this is just my technique, both as somebody doing interviews and as somebody who has interviewed for many high level positions earlier in my career. Now, if you tried to come to me, I'd be like, I'm too, I don't even have time to talk to you.
Right.
But what I would do is I would say the interview always begins before you sit down, right?
Yes.
There's usually the moment, whether it's in a building where you're walking back from the lobby or you're just meeting at the entrance to the restaurant. That's where I'm looking for those initial cues, right? In those very casual moments where there's just this repartee that's going on before you actually sit down. And I think you can probably tell. And I think those things are really nice. Now, the thing that you said about like, well, can we all get better? And I think you can, but you're not going to go from a 3 to a 10, but you could probably go from a 3 to a 5 or a 6. You can learn a little bit about the idea of, well, how can I best express myself in a way that has a little more levity to it? And you can learn some basic things. You don't have to expect miracles, and people that are at the high level of it are always working at getting better.
Yeah. Charles Duhigg, who wrote Super Communicators, pointed out in that book that at some point NASA needed to adjust their hiring system to include people who could manage being in space for long periods of time with other people.
Very good point.
So instead of just being pilots and engineers, they needed people who wouldn't go crazy, right? And so the factor that they decided was important for them was this idea of being able to spot a person who wasn't just laughing at the same time that the interviewer was laughing, because that kind of mirroring was something that a lot of these engineers knew to do, but that they would laugh like at the same kind of intensity as somebody else laughing. So they would actually set up these, fake spillages at the beginning, like all the papers fell out, right? And then they would make a self-deprecating joke about themselves just to see whether or not the astronaut would, number one, the prospective astronaut would come over and help with the papers. And number two, if they would try to further along the self-deprecating joke by making another joke, right? And it was really this kind of matching. And so this notion of like smiling and laughing and trying to do this pattern matching kind of thing.
Sure.
It's not really about the joke. It's not really about tell me a joke. So even these questions that are listed in the field note are not really about trying to get the most creative answer out of it. I think that a lot of it is whether or not the person that you're interviewing is picking up on the idea that you want them to tell a joke, right?
Yeah.
And you can do a lot of that with tone, like the way that you demonstrated, like the way that you kind of ask the questions, like where you want to ask it, but you're like very intent on listen to this question, as opposed to if you kind of jokingly get into the idea of like, I don't know what you're going to think about this question, but here it comes, right? Even the way that I set that up is like, okay, if a person has high EQ, they're going to recognize what I'm trying to do without me actually having to say that.
And we only have a couple seconds, but obviously jokes and humor are aligned, but they're not necessarily the same thing. I mean, there's a disposition that comes about, and you can get better at all of those things. I've been a lifelong student of comedians from a very young age. I was listening to comedy records. I've gone to hundreds and hundreds of comedy shows. I think that I'm moderately funny. I don't think I'm exceptionally funny. I have friends who are comedians.
When you were a teenage magician, how many jokes did you have inside of your
some, but not that many. But I've given many public talks over the years. And I actually would write jokes for friends of mine. And I think I'm actually really good at that. Like I'm almost better at writing jokes for other people. I've actually written jokes for people who are speech writers who have then put those jokes into the mouths of very famous people. And those jokes have worked out very well. I just had lunch, I mentioned, with a friend of mine who's a world famous comedian. I won't mention his name. And he's famous for his kind of one-liners. And he went to this later in his life, like didn't even start this until after his early career in marketing and business. and he just made a business of studying it. But the interesting thing to me is that I've always tried to play around with language with kids, and I have 5 kids and you have 6, but mine are all from 35 down to 11. And what's interesting is across 3 different decades, I can see the similarities in their humor. Now we'll see where the 11-year-old goes, but the way that she plays with language is similar to the ways that the ones that are in their 30s play with language, and 20s. And so you've got all of this whole, sort of range, which is, if you start to kind of enjoy the process of just playing around with the pattern matching and looking for the absurdities, and you can usually never go too wrong with some self-deprecating humor. You don't want to be too self-deprecating in a job interview situation on your own. You're like, this person really has problems, but you usually can go pretty far. And I think leaders can do that. And that's actually I think it was Eisenhower that said that a sense of humor is a part of leadership. It's just the way that you get things done. So I think we're all helped by remembering that leadership is not a humorless business.
Right. True. And there are some artful things in both humor and in leadership there that probably have strong overlap. Great.
Look forward to talking to you tomorrow.
Thank you. Goodbye now.